Yeah, today we're going to be talking about psychology. So a nice little break. If you took Psych 101 anywhere, I'm sorry. This is probably repetitive. But otherwise, you're going to have a great time. Hopefully, you'll have a great time anyways.
So I wanted to mention that this talk was born last year. Last year, I attended this conference as an attendee, and Emmy spoke on stage about ADHD in a digital world. And her talk was so inspiring that I had to come to her and beg her to let me do a talk with her this year.
Dramatic. But yeah, so happy to be here again. This was my first time speaking at anything ever, so I'm really happy to... Or that was last year, and now I'm returning after a lot of other conferences. So hopefully, presentation-wise, it'll be a little bit of an improvement. My name is Emmy. I am a developer advocate at Wix.com. If you're German, I'm sorry for saying that on stage. And this is Jenny.
Hi, I'm Jenny. I work at Stately.ai as the operations manager in developer relations. And show of hands, who here thinks they are a good developer?
Yeah.
Look at those hands.
Good for you, Tejas. But yeah, so a lot of people didn't raise their hands, which I think is cap. So you might have heard about the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's also known as the illusion of competence. So basically, the more and more you learn about something, the less confident you feel that you are like good at it. So the people who are most confident are actually people who are like just starting to learn or like Tejas and experts. So at that point, you're pretty confident just because you have so much experience. But the people in the middle, they just feel like the more you learn, the more you know that there is more to learn, and then you just feel like you know so little. And that's a huge thing in the developer community, which is why I think like imposter syndrome and things are so common in this industry. And so you see a lot of content on like YouTube and things that are like, what is the best language or the best framework for developers to learn? Or they're always arguing about like, oh, should you do this or should you do that? But there's one thing that is critical for developers, and I think the number one skill for developers is actually just the ability to learn. And if you've worked in this field for a very, very long time, and I mean like you've done, like basic or like assembly code, there's a lot of people that are still in the industry that have done like punch cards and things like that. And now they're learning about AI. Like that's so crazy. But it's one industry where if you don't keep upskilling yourself, you're going to fall behind because things just change and change and change. So at some point, it doesn't matter what you're using because tomorrow it might be different. And I think the rise of AI and all of those tools is a really, really good example of this. The good thing, though, is that your brain is incredibly plastic. And I don't mean that as in like Walmart. They don't have Walmart here. I don't know what the equivalent is. Lidl maybe?
Aldi?
I think Lidl is too nice. But yeah, but your brain is incredibly plastic. And when we say plastic in the context of neuroplasticity or the psychology of learning, it just means that it's really, really good at changing and adapting. And it's so good that you could lose function in a big chunk of your brain if you like go through an accident or something. And then you think of usually the brain as this part does this and this part does that. But if you lose function somehow in one part, there's a lot of studies that have found that the rest of your brain picks up for what you lost. So it's actually really, really incredible. And this is an evolutionary advantage. This is why we are making things like AI and like, I don't know, Roblox now, and other animals are just like a monkey. Because your brain is really, really good at getting better at stuff. It's so efficient. And that's because of evolution, just the things you do and are important to you in your day-to-day life, your brain's gonna make those connections stronger and stronger and stronger. And that's what learning is just those connections being stronger. The things that you don't do that often, they will prune. So you'll start losing that ease of access, and it'll be a little bit more difficult. And so naturally, repetition would be the key to doing something like this. And it's not just the brain, it's like your body too. Like you gotta put in the reps. I forget that always means repetitions to do something. So for your body to be like, hey, this is something you do every day. It might be easier for you to like conserve your energy and focus on other things. So for example, when I was learning to drive, I would always, when I was backing into a spot, I'd always think like, I gotta turn this way, but it goes that way. I gotta like do this. I gotta put it back in drive. But now I don't really think anymore. I just push the things. It just happens, and that's, you're evolved to do this. You're not evolved to, however, go on the Tesla tablet and scroll through like the menu to shift your gears. But yeah, if you repeat something, it'll get easier. That's just the basic part of it.
Have you ever had this thought of, I'm practicing so much, but I'm not getting better? Yeah, okay. So repetition is important, but it also depends on like how you are completing that task, how you're practicing. You need to be intentional with these tasks in order to positively reinforce the result that you want. This diagram can either show that this developer is really good at what they do, or they're really productive, or that they don't actually know what they're doing and they're just pulling PRs every day.
Yeah, so it really depends on what the repetitions are. So are you just doing like the easiest tasks just for the sake of doing something every day, and is that meaningful? It's not. Mindless repetition is something to watch for. And so the solution to I'm not getting better even though I'm putting in the reps is to practice with intention, actively like reflect on how you're doing this. School is great because they always give you tests and benchmarks for doing this kind of stuff. But things like active recall, which is basically the term for like test taking and pulling information out of your brain when you didn't know if you knew that knowledge before. So if you've ever learned a language, or if you were like a med student and somehow ended up here, Anki and those like flashcard apps, that is really like the best way to learn. And then sometimes it'll shuffle, which is called interleaving information. And then, sorry to talk about school again, like if you look at a textbook, sometimes in a later chapter, you're in chapter 9, and it'll pull information like based on what we learned in chapter 4. How can we integrate this information and synthesize? So that is called like interleaving information, a really, really good strategy if you want to learn. So in context of programming, maybe not working on the same project every single day, all the time. Taking information you learn from other projects and then integrating it into your current project. Things like learning something new and then you give it a little bit of time, you go back to it like a month later and see if you still know it. Desirable difficulty is also really important, and this has been proven for learning, that if you're taking the easy route, you're not going to learn because that's comfortable. And so if you're studying it for a test and you're reading the words on the page and you're like, yeah, I know this. But if you take the book away, you realize you don't know it, but you don't want to experience the discomfort of like realizing you don't know it, so you don't, it's hard. So introducing some kind of difficulty, like challenging yourself a little bit, is really, really good for learning as well. And this is why people are, if you don't know what tutorial hell is, it's basically like when beginners just do tutorial after tutorial and they're like, I am doing all these tutorials, but I don't feel like I know anything. It's because someone has decided the steps for you already. You're not pulling things out of your brain. You're like looking at your screen and like copying things out. And also at some point, you get used to someone giving you all the steps. And so you don't even get that essential skill of like Googling and like searching for the solution when you have very little to work with, which is, I think, is one of the most important things for developers. And that in itself is another skill. So how do we learn definitively? Repetition, of course, but also active recall, introducing difficulty into your practice, and also practicing in different contexts. So that's super important. Getting PRs from and code reviews from other people, pair programming, and learning about how other people think, and getting your work reviewed, getting feedback is all super, super important for learning.
I have this thought a lot where, oh, this is too easy for me, or maybe it's too hard for me. And the reason why is because sometimes you get into the habit of doing these things, right? Like it gets too easy, so you get bored. But then there's the other extreme of like, this task is too hard, like it's so unknown. Like, how do I get this done? Like you feel like you're a little bit stuck, or like you're afraid to take that leap to like accomplish it.
And this is a valid concern. Like you might think like, oh, shouldn't you operate at the same level for like any kind of level of work you do? Allow me to introduce to you an idea called flow, which is a principle studied by this guy. I can't say, I think it's Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi.
We can call him Dr. C.
Yeah, I'm gonna call him Dr. C. And he was curious about, he went into researching happiness, which is, when you study psychology, that's like kind of everyone's goal at the beginning, but he actually found that it's very, very related to work. So paradoxically, if I ask you like, oh, do you want to go to work today, or would you rather stay in bed and scroll on TikTok? You'll be like, hell yeah, I'm gonna go scroll on TikTok. But and you would think that makes you happier, but in the long term, like he found that people who found meaningful work and things that were hard or felt more difficult, but found some kind of flow through their work, those people experience the most happiness in life. So when people say like time flies when you're having fun, when you are working on something and you're like, I just need to figure this one thing out, and that one thing takes you 6 hours, and all of a sudden it's dark outside and you forgot to eat dinner, and you're like completely okay with it, and it was kind of fun. If you're having those moments, that's the principle of flow. So to achieve this state, I don't know if you guys can read this. On the y-axis is challenge level, and on the x-axis is skill level, so how good you are at something. And flow would be kind of the top right of it, where you're doing something that's objectively difficult, but it's also something that you're pretty good at. So you're like on the verge of getting there. Whereas for something that is like a really boring task and doesn't take a lot of skill, you might feel more apathetic. So if you do struggle with feeling like unmotivated to do things because it feels too easy or too hard. That is completely valid. And you just need to think about how can you get yourself in flow? How can you find the most satisfaction and enjoyment out of the amount of effort you are putting in? So different challenge levels will change how you feel or think or are able to work. And if you're a manager, this is something you can control for all of your teammates, make sure everyone's work is like adequately challenging, or lower it if they're struggling, or like increase it if they're bored.
I also encourage you all to experiment with this because it's not that easy to just find your flow state, right? You have to be more curious and like just kind of try, like attempt to do these things, these hard tasks or these easy tasks, and find where you find like where you'll enjoy it, right? And when you start enjoying it, that will be easier for your brain to just get into this flow state.
So here's the two states of every programmer is like you either feel like you don't know anything, or you feel like I am the best at this. Like I can't believe I just did that. I'm literally the best. But if you've never felt like you're this like sad little dog, probably because he can't type, poor guy, then you're probably doing something wrong. If you're just coasting and you're like watching Netflix on your like 16th monitor, it's probably too easy for you, and you're finding fulfillment through other sources like watching a Netflix show. But if you do feel really good and proud of yourself after doing something, it just feels amazing to succeed at a big challenge, and you get this surge of confidence, like you could do this again, and you could do something harder even. And that's really important for you to have and for you to stay motivated to improve and keep learning. But you don't get that from doing just the easy stuff. It feels the most satisfying when there's a direct path from the right side to the left side. So if there's with the right balance of challenge and your skill level, there should be a path that can get you from not knowing anything, but with a little bit of effort, you can get there. And so if you don't feel like you're challenged enough, or if you feel like something is too challenging, then you stay kind of stagnant.
So when something gets too challenging, there's this huge like misconception of like, oh, I'm not creative enough. I can't find a solution or a good enough solution. And you feel stuck again.
And often, assume like there's no gap in learning. Like you feel like you know everything you should know and have everything you need. And sometimes you can't ask for help. Like you just can't come up with the right ideas, and often you attribute that to like not being creative enough, or I just like I'm not smart enough, or something like that. So we saw the two states of every programmer. There's two states of thought or activity in the brain. So it's scientifically defined by activation of the default mode network and the task positive network for our case and simplicity, because I'm not saying all that. I'm going to say the focused mode and the diffuse mode. So when we're in flow, we're in this sort of focused mode where you're in tune into a really narrow subject area, and you're like when you're doing mental math or something, calculating like a sale, and you're like just thinking about that. On the other hand, there's diffuse mode. So these are like when you're in the shower and you just have these crazy thoughts, and it's a very common thing. There's a big subreddit for it, shower thoughts. This one is so silly. The day a blind man sees, the first thing he throws away is the stick that has helped him all his life. And people are like, oh, that's so deep. Like, why can't I should start a podcast. So this kind of thought happens when you're not really doing anything that requires heavy brain power, right? So you're relaxed, your thoughts come and go randomly when you're taking a walk, and it's often when creative ideas come in. So another example, focused state, a Zoom meeting is not a break, unless you don't expect them to focus, in which case you should write an email. And another example, diffuse thinking. Diffuse mode, you're just chilling at the park, you're trying to fall asleep, and you think of something brilliant, like a brilliant solution. Even though you've been working at it all day, like why did it come when you're doing absolutely nothing? And many artists work this way. The creative ideas will come spontaneously. So you're not like, they don't get a room full of people and you're like, let's make a movie. Anyone have ideas for a movie right now? That's not how they're made. It's usually like, oh, I was walking on the beach and I saw this bird, and now I want to make a Pixar short film about it. That's usually how it happens. And so another way to explain this is, anyone play? I can still hear these sounds in my brain. We should do like a tournament here. If anyone, I have a MacBook, unfortunately, but in pinball, the closer objects are, like if you're in that little triangle with the 3 bumper things, the more confined the space is and the more things there are there, the more it bounces around in the same space. But if there's more space between things, like if you wait for it to fall, if you're in a bad spot and it falls to the bottom, and then you can hit it with one of those bumpers like up, it could go anywhere really. Like there's so much more ground it could cover, unless you're not good, in which case I'm like, I'll let it fall and then I'll recover, and then it just falls through the middle. But that might just be me. So in context, focused and diffuse thinking is kind of like that. So when you're in focused thinking, it's like the points your thought can bounce through are really narrow and bunched up together. So your thoughts never really get the chance to make it to like this random part of your brain that might give you new ideas. Whereas in diffuse mode, it's kind of like, it could go anywhere. You could be taking a walk and you see some trees, and you're like, oh wow, I can't believe it's spring. That means it's almost summer. That means I'm going on vacation. I love Romania. I love trees. I should go outside more often. Just like random trains of thought like that. Yeah, and it's super easy. So coding for 8 straight hours is not always like the best way to work. Sometimes when you're stuck, you actually do need breaks. And so if you're kind of reluctant to take breaks, like if something people tell you will help, but you kind of don't believe it. So that's why we're giving this talk, is like, if you're the more you understand why these things work, the more you can force yourself and eventually believe it and get yourself to do these things. So if you're struggling with lack of creativity or something like that, take a break, do something else. It really will help you, and your brain does process information and thoughts when you're not actively doing work. This is all also heavily related to like sleep, where in your sleep phases is where memory is encoded, and long-term memory comes out of short-term memory. So take a break for real. And yes, start debugging, reflect on what you're actually doing. If you're trying to learn anything new, if you don't get something, like figure out where the gaps are. If you're trying to learn a new skill, not even programming related, if you're just trying to learn an instrument or something and you're feeling kind of stuck. This information applies to everything, because once you know why something happens, you'll know how to be better. And so to recap, we humans are literally made to learn things, and your brain is really, really exceptional at learning things. If it's really, really evident in like children, because at that stage when you're a new human, you're like, your brain's like trying to figure out what you're in this world for and like what you're supposed to do. So like, I don't know how the iPad kids are gonna come out. And repetition is the absolutely key to learning anything. And if you play an instrument or if you know a language or have experience learning language, you just literally do it over and over and over again. And people always ask me like, oh, how did you get so good at like this and that, or like an instrument? And it's literally like you just have to spend time. But repetition is not the only thing. You also have to practice with intention. So for example, like if you're writing JavaScript every single day, like what ways can you vary that to advance further? Like if you just keep going in a straight path, I don't know, would you just be doing like working on the same app, like in vanilla JavaScript, not using any external tools or anything, and staying stagnant in your learning? Ideally, it should be more, learning is usually like a little exponential. You start out slow, you add things on, and then the more variety of things you do, the better you get at all of them. So it actually really, really helps. Like, people think if they started out in like C or like Python and then they do web development, they're at a disadvantage. But it helps so much. But because when you learn something new and you think, oh, this is like how it was in this other language, but this is how it's different. When you have thoughts like that, that reinforces your knowledge in both of those areas. And finding the right challenge for you, this can vary significantly between person to person, and you just have to find the right level for yourself. And ideas also need time. You can come up with ideas on the spot, but really, really good ones and ideas that like live up to the potential that you have, sometimes they just need time and they need breaks. And that's about it for me.
Yeah, please don't forget to give yourself grace. Like, we're all here trying to learn and trying to be the best developer that we can and the best person that we can. So it takes time, it takes patience. Give yourself some grace. And with that, we thank you so much for coming to our talk.
Yeah.